So this is one of the works that I did. It is a short story Freewrite. It was for one of my writing classes. And the way it works is that the professor gives you a sentence and then you have to make a story. So the teacher gave us one that said, "When I went into the attic." So here's what I did. When I went into the attic, I noticed strange tiny footprints on the ground. I went looking for a small photo album and didn't expect to find anything unusual beyond the regular dust, webs, and disarray. At first I ignored it, but then I noticed one of my paintbrushes on the ground. How did it get there? I wondered. I kept shuffling through one of my boxes and began to think about where I might have put that photo album. When I moved on to the next box, I noticed a half-eaten cracker and a piece of hard cheese sitting on the bottom shelf of an empty bookcase. My eyes squinted and I tried to recall a time when I had last been in the attic. Except, wait a minute, it's been years, my thought burst. I live alone, you see, so who could it be? I wondered. Then I noticed all my marbles had been spilled, but in a structured way, as if something or someone rather was playing a game. Now I know something's up, I mumbled aloud. An urge told me to examine the attic more, in case there's squatters somewhere. As I pushed the pillars of boxes around, I came up short. Nothing. Then I caught sight of my old dollhouse. Couldn't believe I still had the damn thing. I should donate it, I mumbled to myself. I grasped the latch and opened it up. Then suddenly I saw a bunch of tiny little tattered cone-shaped hats and patched up tiny socks. I don't remember these at all, shot through my mind. And then I saw a tiny little pipe. A little cannabis crumbs. Who the hell's been smoking my weed in this tiny little pipe? Burst out from my mouth. I then began to search the entire attic for a sign of break-in. As I was touching the window frame, I felt a pestering poke at my ankle. When I turned, I saw an abandoned teeny tiny pitchfork. Very peculiar, I said under my breath. Then there at the corner of my eye, I saw something scurry into a pile of old boots. I rushed over to the pile and began tossing boots here and there, and even boots slapped an old scarecrow in the face. "Aha!" I shouted. A tiny little gnome stood there, staring at me, pot-bellied with a bald spot. "What the fuck are you doing here?" I asked him confusedly. He answered, "It's winter and the garden is dead. Plus there's cheese and weed in here." I sat down Indian style and placed him on my knee area. "You need to do your laundry," I told him. He stared back, pulled up his breeches, and said, "I do my laundry. There's other gnomes, and I am not a maid." "There's more of you?" I asked, to which he said, "Well, yeah, they just went downstairs to get more cheese. Can't smoke without some good cheese, now can we?" "I know, it makes the cheese taste better," I chuckled. Then, as we sat discussing which sort of cheeses we preferred, more gnomes showed up. I introduced myself properly, and they did as well. I then told them, "Well, now that we are properly acquainted, let's head downstairs for a righteous smoke sesh. I have some Cali Kush that tastes like blueberries." A chorus of snorts and chuckles and tiny pitter-patters could be heard as I followed down the stairs, and then I was also followed by a bunch of stoner cheesemongers. The end. Okay, then the next sentence, because you can make some comedy stories too, so I tried to make a funny one. And now the professor gave us a line that says, "When they burned me at the stake." And so he gives you this sentence, and then bam, you got to make a little short story. So here's what I wrote. "When they burned me at the stake, I smelled bacon. I felt my toenails melt, and the heat made my eyes shut in a vain attempt to stop them from being hard-boiled. I begged for Allah to take me now. Take me! But my heart was pumping my circulatory system. I craved for my comfortable bed and favorite pillow. I repeated, 'Let go, let go, let go,' over and over. My soul clung to the heated bones as fire peeled my flesh like melted candle wax. The fire branded me like cattle, and I moaned like a dairy cow. The flames entered my anus and vagina, and my heated tears burned trails on my cheeks. I shat and pissed myself, and roasted shit choked my throat. My nipples burned, and I begged for an arrow to my heart, but the angel only wept. As the fire licked my throat, my djinn sat perched on my cross, in repose, munching on raccoon jerky. Then the blanket of life was pulled off, and my soul shot out from a charred skeleton into space. Freedom! Now remember, the teacher is going to grade you on the creativity, the uniqueness of what you wrote, how concise it is, and almost since this one's physical, like you have to actually give like what you have to try to make it as real as you can. So that's what I did. This was already graded, so I can share it with you. And then the next sentence he gave us was, "When I died," and then you have to write a short story. When I died, I found myself at the bottom of a hilly swamp. There were hippos and alligators everywhere. It was congested. The environment had a silver-green hue. I turned and saw my djinn. It was a collection of atoms with numbers swirling inside. When I looked closer, to my horror, it had mini replays in the GIF fashion of my worst moments, as if the djinn was making a vine of my suffering. When I turned left, so did it. When I turned right, it followed suit. The most distracting shadow. Some of the hippos were beginning to wake, and the gators slid into the black water, and as they did so, bright green slimy moss caressed their dermal armor. Panic tickled my spirit's toes as my celestial mind contemplated on how to escape without swimming in the endlessly marsh-pitted landscape. My djinn's interior began to flash images of the past over and ever more brightly as my nerves rippled more and more into the energy field around us. Every time I looked at the horrific memories, I felt like holding still. And every time I held still, the alligators and the hippos edged ever near me. Then a resistance started building. Strength started to energize the veins that once were. In the distance, a collection of light pulsated tones of pastels of the morning and the evening. I looked to the ground and saw my first pet hamster, then the second, and they appeared to know where they were heading. I followed them up the trail with my djinn at my back. At the top, the hamsters retreated into a pile of boulders. Before me was a long bridge, extending over a vast ocean. As I stepped forward, gusts of wind tried to push me like paper as fear slid up my nose. My djinn replayed soundless images of me crying. I stood still, afraid to move forward. Then I felt a cold, wet nose touch my hand. It was my dad's dog, Frankie, the Rottweiler. In life, a trained security dog. I felt strength in my phantom spine. We moved forward. As we held our ground against the wind, a distant cluster of white orbs was coming towards us. As they drew near, Frankie's hair stood on end. Cars! Many tried to run us over, but every time they came near, Frank would snarl, bite, and attack, causing the cars to swerve and crash. Each time a car came close, the djinn shot out numbers. As we made it to the end, I noticed something moving in the deep jewel ocean far below. Whales! The end of the bridge arrived, and I scratched Frankie's favorite spot above his tail at the end of his back. He did his funny dance and ran off chasing a motorcycle. Alone again, just me and the djinn. This time showing subtitles of every insult I've been told. Then before me was a field of black barren trees covered by the blanket of night. I saw my bright green and yellow parakeet Hamlet upside down hanging on a branch, while my white and blue parakeet Hedwig squawked in usual shrill fashion. And I stepped onward down the dirt road. Then it appeared, a fortress of a castle decorated in gargoyles with an open gate. But when I stepped through the gate to the castle, it vanished, and suddenly a bed appeared, and something was under the blanket. I recognized this bed, I thought to myself. I pulled the covers off, and slobber dripped from his face. It was Spanky, my dad's three-legged caramel-colored mastiff. I climbed into my childhood bed, pulled the covers over, and peacefully laid to rest. No Jim in sight. So, I got an A on this. So, the teacher gives you an assignment, right? Here it is on the board. You got X amount of time to write it. Write it, type it up, submit it. That's what you got to do. And so, those were my little short story free writes. It's hard to do. You think that you can write a good story with a limited amount of time, but it's really interesting. I hope you like it. You have to be creative, cat family. So I had to be creative because if I just write the typical story, I won't get an A. Remember, I'm competing with all my classmates. So if you want to be the top in the class, you have to be super creative and break out of your comfort zone. So I hope you thought it was, interesting, kind of cool. All right, family.